Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove. I'm joined by a man who's had 24 hours to think things over. His name is Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello. I've taken all 24 hours as well to think things over.
We really are 24 hours after the end of USA Trinidad here, right?
I should say like 18 hours. I slept for a little while.
I did not sleep too well, if I'm honest.
I mean, I didn't sleep well. I just did sleep. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So we're here. We are gathered here today, Taylor. We're not going to look back at USA Trinidad. We are not doing a deep dive on that game. Yeah. It's not worth it. I think I watched a little bit extra, and it's pretty much what we said, right?
Why would you do that? Why?
Just it was all over Twitter, and I couldn't avoid seeing some highlights, and
You just wanted to feel worse?
Yeah. So today's show, we're going to take a bigger picture look back at the World Cup qualifying campaign, specifically the Hex, and try and figure out a couple things or more that went wrong. Yeah. We can't name all of them because there were a lot. And then in the second half of the show, we're going to try and look forward because there's a sort of uncertain future for US soccer, which is half depressing and disappointing, but could also be exciting as a period of change. We don't know who the next coach is going to be, for example. So there's all that to talk about in the second half of the show.
So then with that said, I do want to take us down sort of a negative path just to start.
Okay.
But from a positive perspective. That doesn't make sense, but hopefully it will in a second. Because when you say you want to look back at the Hex about qualification, about what's gone wrong, there's lots of other stuff that predates the Hex that goes back, a decade, I would say, that are problems. But what I want to get to right now is the idea that, as we say often, things can be two things. And I would say that Jurgen Klinsmann didn't work out, wasn't very good. I would say Bruce Arena didn't work out, wasn't very good. And it seems like the way things have gone, because it seems like the way things have gone, at least in online debates and comments,
You mean Twitter.com?
No, I mean on Reddit. I mean on the comment section of all of the many different articles that you and I both read. And it always devolves into, it's Arena's fault. See, Arena didn't get it right. Well, it's Klinsmann's fault that we got to this place and that Arena could have righted it if he'd had two. And it's just sort of it can be both of their faults because I would say it was. Yeah. So that's why I want to start with saying, we're not saying it's all Klinsmann's fault because I think we're going to start with the beginning of qualification, and that means we're going to start with Jurgen Klinsmann. But that is not to say that he's 100% at fault and Bruce Arena was dealt a bad hand.
Okay, no, I'm with you. It can be both of their faults, and it's kind of a pointless argument to argue about which coaches takes most of the blame. Yeah. But here's the point I'd like to get to.
Sure.
Is after Klinsmann was, I think, still justifiably fired after losing to Mexico, and then the performance against Costa Rica is really what did it, right? We were very positive, we being me and you, Total Soccer Show, very positive on the Bruce Arena appointment. We thought, pragmatic, he'll see us through, he'll right the ship, he'll get us to the World Cup, and then, the future can happen afterwards, but Bruce Arena will get us to the World Cup. Yeah. And we were wrong because we are not going to the World Cup.
We were wrong, and I still maintain that years from now there is going to be a tell-all book about what happened in the last 4 months or so. Right. Maybe fewer than that, maybe 3 months.
Because it started really well, right? It started with the 6-0 win over Honduras, then we got a draw away to Panama, I believe.
That sounds familiar.
Then a win at home, and then the tie at the Azteca with Michael Bradley's chip, and then we won the Gold Cup, and it was all feeling very good, and then the wheels came off in September.
They did, and I
never really came back on, except they looked like they were coming back on against Panama briefly, but it was just a mirage.
Yeah, it certainly was, and I have some theories about what went wrong, and there's lots of opinions out there, but I genuinely believe that there is some huge thing, that if it was a fracture in the locker room, or he lost the faith of some players, or maybe it was just people I don't know what it was, but in the end, it feels like something went very wrong that led to this spot.
So I think something went wrong, but I don't think there's some secret argument that happened behind closed doors or some break in the locker room. I really think it's just that what we talked about was the naivety and the not particularly not dumb is the word we used that I was trying to avoid, and maybe even arrogance of Arena's tactical choices at home to Costa Rica, where we went too open and got punished, and then away to Trinidad, where we went too open and got punished. Yeah.
I mean, but in between there was another string. Really, outside of that Panama game, which maybe in retrospect was an outlier, it's been a series of disappointing games since that Gold Cup final.
The Panama game was the same kind of tactics and formation that was rolled out against Costa Rica and against Trinidad, and essentially it worked. It worked at home to Honduras, so it worked twice against easier opposition, and it worked not twice. It did not work twice against two other teams, and that's what cost us. Right? If we'd just gone to Trinidad and defended, we'd be going to the World Cup right now. Yeah,
this is true. And so, I mean, do you want to get to that game in particular? Or do you want to get?
No, I think what I'm getting at is kind of the the way that Bruce Arena approached the Hex was sort of like, yeah, we can play open, we can play just Michael Bradley in central midfield and a bunch of attackers ahead of him. Not just the Trinidad game, but other games, and we'll get to the Hex anyway because we always do. I think in hindsight, that's kind of what happened.
All right, yeah, and I think I'm going to go a little bit of like I don't know, pseudo-psychology from far, far away, and I know you're not inclined to do that.
From far, far away?
I mean, in the sense that
from a distance.
Yeah, in the sense that I don't know Bruce Arena, I don't know his mentality.
You're not a shrink.
I am not, but I feel like his approach has been from the outset, it's like, he hasn't really said this, but I feel like the implication has been, it's not that hard. Like this whole I think he has said this whole soccer thing, it's not that hard. Like you don't need to overcomplicate it. And I think that extends, in his mind, to CONCACAF qualification. I think that's what everyone has said, is like, it's so forgiving, you can lose those first two games and still qualify fairly easily. And I think everybody had that expectation, including Bruce Arena. And it does feel like as the Hex went on, it felt more and more like, oh, don't worry, it's all going to come together. Oh, it's not that hard. Oh, we got it figured out. Oh, it's not a problem. Oh, we'll figure it out after the World Cup, except now we're not going to the World Cup.
Yes, isn't that a point that Neil Blackman made in his article for youngstercoming.com, which was that Bruce Arena essentially at some point said, like, this isn't the group of players that will go to the World Cup. We'll like bring in some youth afterwards. We'll bring in some new players afterwards. Yeah. But for the Hex, we'll stick with the guys we've got.
I believe his line was roughly, we can qualify with a flawed roster and then we can fix things. So the implication there, or no, just the actual statement is, the roster right now is flawed, but we'll qualify with a flawed roster and then we'll figure it out. And in most situations, in most other countries, you couldn't do that. You would be like, there are flaws, we got to fix them now because we're in the middle of qualification and it's unforgiving. And in this situation, the Hex was forgiving on multiple occasions, but in the end, the United States couldn't even kind of deal with that.
Oh, okay. The other thing that I think about afterwards, and this goes to the Trinidad game specifically, but I think is a wider picture. Yeah. It's kind of the arrogance of complaining about the conditions, right? And this also goes to Taylor Twellman's really good and effective. And it really stirred me up. Taylor Twellman's rant makes it sound like I don't agree with it, but rant is a good word. Right?
Yeah, it makes it sound like it's like unhinged or out of control, but really it was a rant in the sense that he was real mad, and it was a long diatribe, but it was justified and, I don't know, well informed.
And to get to the point of what he said, I took his point to be, we're talking about like how we can compete with Belgium because we're thinking about how we go deeper in a World Cup, and we kind of forgot to think about how do we compete with our CONCACAF rivals, right? Which is what gets you to the World Cup. And part of that for me is this goes it goes to Bruce Arena's tactics against Trinidad and Costa Rica. It goes to US Soccer's Twitter account tweeting out the river to Russia, kind of poking fun at the fact that Trinidad had rain around their field, right? It goes to us as well, maybe taking that we joined in on that kind of laughing about the conditions and thinking of it that way. It just seems like a thing that we didn't prepare for those conditions properly. We just kind of poked fun at another nation for having those conditions.
Yeah, well,
you know what I mean? Like implying that we're better than that, and that's why we're going to the World Cup and you're not.
I mean, and I do think that there was that reaction. Like, maybe we did that. I can't say for sure, but I would say that like it does feel like when everybody tried to praise Trinidad at the end for like fixing the field, that felt very like, ooh, we went too far in one direction. We got to be like, what heroic efforts went into putting a pump in place and getting the water off the field.
I think maybe either US Soccer had words with the US media, or the Trinidadian Federation had words with US Soccer, who had words with the US media to sort of like, you know, don't cause an incident here. Don't cause a rift. But it was kind of too late at that point.
But to your point about the conditions themselves, I mean, Twellman ends that rant or diatribe or monologue, whatever you want to go with the point of like Belgium beat Bosnia on a cow pasture. Yeah, you're going to deal with adverse conditions. It's part of qualifying from the Hex.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So I also want to add to your point about arrogance, because we didn't really get into the idea of arrogance with this team, specifically with Bruce Arena.
Well, I think when we said naive and dumb, that's kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, except David Williams, who emailed in, I want to quote his email because he made a very good point. He said, in normal circumstances, the recovery from Friday to Tuesday should be adequate. So he's pointing to the idea of, I think this was in reference to the United States playing the same formation and the exact same starting 11.
Yep.
But these are not normal circumstances. The adrenaline for the USMNT was on full throttle in the Panama game. Just look at the goal celebration from Pulisic. Every player that played 70-plus minutes in the Panama game should have been carefully considered for replacement in the TNT game. This is not a set of 11 players in the entire USMNT. Sorry, there is not a set of 11 players in the entire USMNT pool that should not be capable of going to TNT and playing for a tie. So basically his point is, you could take any player, any 11 in that pool and go to TNT and expect to be able to get some sort of result. But when you take the exact same 11 that just played a highly emotional, highly intense game and expect them to get that result, that's going to be much harder. And it speaks to arrogance of, oh, it'll be fine, versus we should probably put in some serious consideration and figure some stuff out.
Serious consideration being something like preparing for this game.
Yeah.
Like the Bruce Arena big quote, I think you retweeted it.
I retweeted Julie Stewart-Binks retweeting it.
Yeah, which was that basically we haven't thought about Trinidad, we're only thinking about Panama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it kind of showed because they sent the same lineup out, which was not suited at all to the conditions, to the opposition, to Trinidad's shape and Trinidad's game plan, and we paid for it. I feel like we've ended up talking about Trinidad a lot, so I want to sort of pull us out, get a wider view. Did this US team have the talent to qualify for the World Cup?
Yes.
I think it's yes. Yeah. Also,
I mean, absolutely, yeah. So, I don't think people are wrong to say that this is probably the deepest talent pool the United States has ever had. That you look at some of the players who weren't there, either because they weren't caught up or due to injury, and it's still an incredibly strong team, whereas teams in the past, if we haven't had our first choice center back, we're in a lot of trouble. Oh, we don't have a midfielder? Oh, we're in a lot of trouble. We don't have our forward? Oh, we're in a lot of trouble. Here, it felt like we had options at basically every position. And so, yes, I think absolutely this is a team that could have qualified.
I'm not sure I agree with that, because when you think of like options in central midfield and the way like so much rested on Michael Bradley's shoulders, that maybe it's not the deepest team ever.
See, that's where you get into like a weird sort of nebulous conversation about like, but that's from the perspective of, oh, it's Michael Bradley starting. Whereas you could say, I think he absolutely should have been starting. My point is simply that you're going with like, Michael Bradley is the only person who could have done that Michael Bradley role as Bruce Arena designed it.
Yeah.
I think Bruce Arena also could have had Dax McCarty and Kellen Acosta as two holding midfielders and put three other players in there, and maybe that gets the result as well.
Okay.
Like, I think it's still like you have that depth where you could have other players come in, perform different roles, but succeed.
Yeah.
I was going to say just as much, but more, I guess, is what would have been required.
So, yeah, I'd argue that this US team had more than enough talent to qualify for a World Cup, which also leads to the idea that we're going to talk about changes to the US program, what's going to happen going forward, but it's not so irreparably broken that we never had the skills to compete, which is kind of what happened in the sort of 70s, 80s up until 1989, right? There was the talent to qualify, and I would argue that the problems of this Hex campaign are more micro, is that the correct word, in terms of the coach and the player selection and the tactics, than they are macro in terms of the entire US soccer system, which is why I'm slightly disturbed by a lot of the arguments I'm seeing online, which are about like, we need to just like take this as a chance to just rip everything apart and start over.
Because it still feels like a lot of people want to say it's the same established players, it's all their fault, players didn't want it, they didn't really work hard enough, and so it showed. I think you can make an argument that, players weren't as motivated as they should have been, and probably weren't as like sharp as they should have been. And again, I think
I'd agree with the second one, but not.
I think that goes to fatigue mostly, and there is an element of like Josie Altidore, for example, to go to that Trinidad game. Like we talked about the minute where he just like throws his arms up and looks like he's a frustrated little kid. Does he do that if he's not tired and worn out from that first Panama game? Probably not. A fresh Josie Altidore probably keeps battling and winning and getting in people's face. But when you're a little bit tired, when you're at 85% instead of 100%. Then you're not at 100%.
And does he do that in a team where you're not asking everybody to play kind of passes through the lines through the middle when it's really hard to do that because of the way we're set up? Probably not, right?
No.
So he's not set up to succeed.
No.
Not that it's all on the coaches, right? Because I know some people get annoyed at us because we focus a lot on tactics and coaches, and we never sort of blame the players. But I'm always really reticent to say like, these players didn't try hard enough and it's all their fault. And I'm a little concerned for guys like Omar Gonzalez, who people are sort of saying like, it's almost like they want to turn him into a villain. Like, we're not his biggest fan, I think it's fair to say, for his like the way that he likes to drop back and break his own offside line and all that sort of stuff. But I wouldn't ever sort of, boo and hiss at him in public, because he's hurting at least as much as any fan. I would say an awful lot more.
I wouldn't boo and hiss at him, but we had this conversation in the bar last night that like, it is a strange thing to think about some of these players and Bruce Arena as well, that like before Bruce Arena was appointed, if I saw him in a bar, I'd be like, whoa, it's Bruce Arena. Like, I want to buy him a drink. I want to have a word. I genuinely, last night, if I saw him in a bar, I don't know what I would do. Because I think at best, I'd be like, I don't really want to talk to him. But I know at some point I would be like, hey, thanks for not letting me see Josie Altidore play in another World Cup. Because I feel like that's a distinct possibility that we don't see him in a World Cup ever again, which is kind of a bummer. And I don't really want to go down that road. So you're right that we maybe have a tendency to blame coaches. But I also want to say, if you'll forgive me for going on my own mini rant for a second, I think I saw a lot of people frustrated by the perceived lack of enthusiasm or energy, and also the lack of willingness from certain players or individual players to take the game by the scruff of the neck. And you compare this U.S. team with, say, Argentina playing against Ecuador, go 1-0 down, Leo Messi rises to the occasion, takes that game by the scruff of the neck, scores a hat trick. It's an amazing individual performance, and it is. But when a player has to do that, it's almost always because everything else has failed.
Yeah.
And that is where the coaching comes in.
I saw the Ecuador goal and definitely plenty failed in the Argentina defense.
But you know what I mean? That there's this idea that we gotta you just put your players out there, they should know how to execute the game plan. But the reality is, if you've told Michael Bradley you're going to be operating as the lone midfielder in the center of the pitch, but when you get the ball, if you turn, you'll have two players checking in and you'll have one player making a run down the left wing, so you can have those three options every single time, just as an example. But then when he turns and one player isn't checking too, and one player is running in the opposite direction, and one player isn't moving either, now none of that's happening. And that's because people don't quite understand the roles that they've been given. And so then everything breaks down, and it requires an individual performance at that point.
So does this go back to us sort of being wrong about Bruce Arena? Because I really thought my problem with Klinsmann from 2014 onwards, 2015 Gold Cup is when I first started to really feel it. Was that sort of the team didn't really have a game plan, certainly didn't have like specified instructions and roles and things to do. And I honestly thought part of the, quote, pragmatic, unquote, approach of Bruce Arena would be all the players will have specific instructions and they'll all kind of... I know he's not a deep dossier type tactician, Bruce Arena, but I thought of him as here's the basic plan, here's what you do when this happens, here's what you do when this happens, common sense, bish, bash, bosh, go do it.
Bish, bash, bosh.
Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? Real simple tactical instructions.
Yep.
In the end, I don't think that's what we got.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I want to go back to say, I know that there are people who have varying opinions on when Jurgen Klinsmann should have been fired or if he should have ever been hired in the first place. I would just say that you and I agreed around roughly the same time, around when he was fired, that things were not working and it did not look good. So to start there, I want to say, I think Klinsmann should have been fired when he was fired. He probably should have been fired earlier, but he was not a good coach in that moment. With that said, last night I turned to you and said, is this in any way dissimilar from that Jurgen Klinsmann side that when he needed to be fired? It was the same. There didn't seem to be a plan. People didn't seem to understand what was being asked of them. Everyone sort of looked out of it and really disinterested. And in that regard, then it's the same thing and it's more of the same. And if you want one coach gone, if another coach is kind of doing the same stuff, then you kind of want that one gone too.
So were we wrong about Bruce Arena is what I'm trying to get at?
Yes and no. No in the sense that we weren't wrong with what we expected given past performance and the precedent that had established. But I think in the end, that's not what we got. We didn't get the pragmatist who is going to really go for that win at home, but set himself to get that win, and then go away and get the draws. We got that sometimes.
We got it at the Azteca, right? That was the only time when we definitely went to the away game and was all right, we're going to sort of play 5-4-1. We're going to get a point. We're going to get out of there. It's going to be gold.
But it is insane to me to think that Bruce Arena, knowing we need a draw, and that's it. A draw got the United States there. It really, or at least got them into the Intercontinental Playoff.
No, a draw would have... unless Honduras had won by multiple goals and Panama had won by multiple goals, a draw would have got the United States to Russia.
So it is insane to me that they didn't get a draw. And in the end,
and didn't look like they were playing for something that had a bit of conservatism to it, right?
No,
a midfielder alongside Michael Bradley.
And that's where, I know some people predicted that, maybe the United States will concede early on a fluke, but they'll end up winning 3 or 4-1. And
that's what I said when Trinidad scored.
Yeah, and I was kind of that mind too. I just kind of thought the United States was going to be a really boring, frustrating game, and the United States would win 1-0, maybe 2-1, but it always felt like Bruce Arena was going to do what needed to be done and be practical. And in the end, he didn't do that. He went with the same 11 and the same formation, and the vulnerabilities there were exploited.
And so we argued with people. So I feel surprised by that, right? And I kind of I don't feel like it was my fault, at least, for being pro Bruce Arena, because that's not the Bruce Arena that I thought I was getting. Right? That wasn't as expected. The thing that he did do that people were worried about is stick with his favourites.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Omar Gonzalez. It seems that Omar Gonzalez started ahead of Jeff Cameron in the past 2 games, did not perform well. We saw Jeff Cameron sitting on the bench, not looking thrilled. And I see this as an example of the thing we were worried about with Bruce Arena, which is that he would have his favourites and he would stick with them, despite evidence that other players are maybe better.
So here's what I'll say to that, and again, forgive me if this is a little bit rambly, but
it's fine. I mean, these are big topics.
I would say when he took over, I wanted to qualify for the World Cup. That was my priority.
Me too.
And I would also say that I think the players that I expected to be his favorites like, I didn't really have an issue with, because I expected that he would have Jeff Cameron be his starting center back because he was probably the most important defender the United States had. I would have expected it to be DeAndre Yedlin, maybe Fabian Johnson when he took over. But, like, I guess in my mind it was sort of like, yeah, you go with the people you know because they're the ones that you can trust to get the result.
But Omar Gonzalez is the people he knows.
That's what I guess I kind of didn't figure, is that
Jesse Zardes was called up despite being in not good form.
I mean, that was where I really started to lose faith when I saw that roster. That didn't make sense to me.
I wasn't worried about it because it was the 26th man on a roster, and he probably wasn't going to play, and it's kind of, you know, just a squad presence type guy. Like, at least Zardes wasn't starting every game.
No, and I think that was where the real red flags came for me, was when I saw that roster. Yeah, because I know that was the argument of, like, everyone's so upset about the 26th man on a 23-man roster, the 25th man or whatever, but it's still like, yeah, but they're still there, and it still shows that, like, yeah, I want Giassi. Like, he makes me feel safe. He's my binky, you know?
But what it really gets to is the absolute refusal to look at, say, Weston McKennie, or someone like, that's an extreme example, but like someone who was outside of the circle but impressive from a distance, and maybe you get him in and take a look at him. Like, that's the thing of, like, it seems like this goes back. We're getting circular here. We're going back to the idea that, yeah, the guys I know, the guys I've already worked with, they can get us to Russia, and then maybe I'll bring in these, like, flash new players afterwards.
Yeah.
And it was not realising that maybe we need to change things up now. Maybe we should have looked at Ethan Horvath instead of Tim Howard for all these games.
Maybe, but that's not even the thing that I think was so worrying to me. It was more so the idea, and this is an analogy that maybe won't make sense, but, like, say I've got you, Daryl Grove, as, like, my podcast partner. You're the ideal person to have as my podcast partner. But there's this other person that, like, I've podcasted with before, and they're okay, and I like them, so I'm going to have them in there. But then suddenly that they become my go-to when you are the obvious start, that just never occurred to me. So, like, I always knew...
Do I still get my paycheck?
I mean, I guess in this situation, yeah, they probably got their... I don't know if Jeff Cameron got his game day check because he didn't play, but I would say that, like, I guess that's not a great analogy, but what I'm trying to get to is the idea that, like, I understand him having his people who he wants in there for locker room and bringing people together. I'm assuming that's why Nick Raimondo was there. But it never occurred to me that, yes, they're his people, but he's also going to start them over, I would say, people who should be starting. Yeah. The obvious example here being Jeff Cameron, to me, was always a starter. If he's fit, he's in there. He's the number one center back. Maybe number two if John Brooks is playing out of his mind. So then that it was like, his people were so preferred to such a level that, like, if it was a young center back who hadn't really shown much at the international level, but we were excited about him and Bruce Arena didn't call him in, that I understand that. But when it's not playing Jeff Cameron because, I like Omar Gonzalez, that's where I have issues.
Okay, so I think we're pretty clear on the idea that we're not thrilled with how, especially the latter half of this Hex campaign went. At time of recording, Bruce Arena is still the US men's national team coach.
Yeah.
He hasn't resigned and he hasn't been fired. I think, did Stephen Goff tweet out that there's going to be an announcement from US Soccer on Friday morning?
The US Soccer board, I believe it is, including Sunil Gulati, are going to be fielding questions on Friday. What that says to me, without any sort of information whatsoever, is that Bruce Arena is probably going to be fired, or that, like, he was hired to get us to the World Cup. He didn't get us to the World Cup, so that's the end of that arrangement. And it makes me think that Sunil Gulati will still be in the picture, at least in the short term.
Do you want to talk about Sunil Gulati, or do you want to talk about Bruce Arena, our next US coach?
You are the man in charge in the sense that you do the hello and welcome, so I'll follow your lead.
All right, let's talk about Sunil Gulati.
Sure.
So a lot of the reaction has been, fire Sunil, get him out of there, right? The thing is, you can't really fire Sunil.
Nope.
Sunil Gulati is elected, right? So the next US Soccer election, as luck would have it, is February 2018. It is coming up kind of soon. So even though there's kind of a mob mentality right now of, like, we want, like, Sunil dragged through the streets for some reason. And again, I'm not going to argue that he's done a great job, especially recently. Because you can't, like, he hired the last two coaches that collectively didn't get us to the World Cup. It's just one example of the things I'm not thrilled about.
There's a long list if you wanted to go down that road. The U.S. women's team would like a word with you if you think he's done a great job.
Definitely. He did not handle that well at all. But if he's fired tomorrow, what good does that do us? We don't have another president until the election. So more likely is he just announces he doesn't stand in the 2018 election, the February 2018 election. Or if he does stand, given current climate, there's a good chance that he's defeated.
Right. So I think he can be fired. I think there's probably like a vote of no confidence or whatever, and the board could remove him. But that's not going to happen.
Board of directors. Right?
So basically, it would be either he resigns right now or he says he's not going to run for office. I could see either one of those happening tomorrow. Most likely, in my opinion, is that he does run because I think he wants to be the one who rights the ship, and then that's his legacy. Nobody wants to leave their legacy on a down note. And then the second most likely is that he says he's not going to stand for office. But I can't see if he's going to be involved in a Q&A tomorrow. I can't see it being like, so first question, what's the future for Sunil? And they're like, oh, no, he's been let go. But he's going to answer some questions first before we kick him out the door, you know?
I mean, maybe it could be a resignation Q&A. It's not, is it?
It's not.
So what I'm thinking is there's a lot of listeners going to be wanting sort of anger and just saying Sunil should be gone and all this sort of stuff, right? But I think part of how I like to think about these things is to be a little more calm and logical and rational. And just because it would feel good to see someone fired right now, the president, or, you know, vote of no confidence and removed, it doesn't actually do US soccer any good to remove Sunil Gulati this week or even next week.
This is awkward because I bought 12 effigies of Sunil Gulati. I thought we were on the same page, and now it seems like you're going rational.
But do you agree with me or disagree that there's, even though it would feel good to fire him, it doesn't actually do anything?
I think it's compounded by the fact that there has not been any sort of public statement. Again, like the last thing U.S. Soccer tweeted was like, devastated, but we'll rebound. And it's just like, yeah, that's not enough, man. Mm-hmm. And so I think the longer there's silence, the more people feel like people aren't going to be held accountable, the more that like the more vocal those voices become. But I think, when you look at it from like a rational standpoint, just getting rid of him doesn't really solve anything because there are so many problems. That said, I would like him gone. I would like him not to run for office. I think there needs to be change, and I think having the same person there isn't going to necessarily facilitate that.
So maybe the ideal solution is just that like he doesn't immediately resign. He just says, I did it wrong. I'm not going to run for re-election in 2018, but let me see out the rest of my term. I've got some 2026 World Cup bid to wrap up. There's some paperwork to do there. I've got to be ready to pass that on to the next guy, all that kind of stuff. Let him do like a lame duck presidency up until February.
The thing that's hard about this, and I'll say like is hard about a lot of the aspects that we're going to talk about or already have talked about, is the fact that like in a lot of ways people don't know. Like if this were a Fortune 500 company, if it's this major company that like their money is on the line, they would fire their CEO or whatever, their chairman, if they were losing money, if they had made a horrible business decision, they're out. It's not going to go well. U.S. Soccer, they're going to lose some money because they're not in the World Cup. Certainly, I think it was estimated at like $100 million. Well, who knows if that's true.
Luckily they have that surplus.
There's that. Probably worse than that. But my point is like more so that I don't know how it works. I don't know if that's the way U.S. Soccer's board works. I don't know if they're ruthless and there is going to be some power coup where they're like, look, you can say I'm not going to stand for office or we will force you out. I don't know if that's how it works or if it's everyone is just sort of like, whatever, Sunil's been there, he's done right by us, we'll stick with him. And so I think that makes it harder to say how it should be or what's going to happen. And that's kind of where it ends up for me, is like I can't say, yes, he's going to be gone because I don't know what that would entail.
Should we try and imagine a future where he does not win the election in February 2018, right? As things stand right now, there are, 3 candidates who've kind of announced that they're definitely running against him. I mentioned on yesterday's show an attorney from Boston. His name is Steve Gans. There is Paul Lapointe, and there is someone called Motta. I don't have his full name.
He is the head of like the National like Adult Amateur Soccer Association. Okay. I believe he is a Dunkin' Donuts franchisee several times over. So I think he is also on the U.S. Soccer board, and previously, I think in like 1998, defeated Sunil Gulati in an election for vice president of U.S. Soccer, I believe. Yes.
Okay, and there's also rumors that Eric Winalda wants to run. Like he's mentioned this. I saw you linked me an article
from the Guardian
from September, like late September, right? So somewhat recent.
Yep.
And there's also I saw a GoFundMe. Did you see this?
No.
Someone set up a GoFundMe to fund Winalda's sort of presidential run. And he kind of linked to it and said, hey, have you seen this? Like so he's hinting that maybe, we don't know, right? We don't know if he's 100% in on doing it or not. But to me, Winalda would be sort of the at least he would represent a kind of revolutionary sweeping change type thing that I think would make people happy.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's got the reputation both as a player, I mean, a Hall of Famer for the U.S. national team, but also
a critic of U.S. soccer,
famously
of MLS,
has that attitude, and that's a part of it, right? And like I said this to you off air, but it bears repeating. Like the story that we've talked about before about how he was in charge of the team when they were going to Copa America. They wanted more money, or they wanted any money.
They wanted the players to be paid equally equally.
There it is.
And US Soccer was trying to make them sort of have the senior players take more, and I think in the junior players take next to nothing.
Yeah, and then when they said, well, we'll just replace you all with amateur players if you won't like get in line, his response was like, good luck with that, and hung up the phone.
Good luck at Copa America.
Yeah, like that to me, like that speaks volumes about his character, that he isn't afraid to tell you to F off, and I'm trying to help you not use the bleeper since you're editing this evening.
It's going to work out lately.
Yeah, so I just feel like he has that sort of like, I don't care, I'll do what I want, and you guys are just going to have to deal with that. That can be bad, certainly, but it can also be a force for change.
So there's also some stuff that maybe we take for granted, which is that Sunil Gulati has set the US Soccer Federation up to be kind of at least a well-oiled machine, in that it feels like a corporation, is what you were saying, which is a thing that didn't used to be true. So if you bring Eric Ronaldo in, is there a chance that we sort of lose any sponsorships or that kind of stuff? Or is this thing... I think I'm talking myself into this now without even asking you, that this thing is already rolling, and Sunil Gulati's kind of, maybe his legacy will be to have like corporatized US soccer in a way that might be useful long term because it means there's an income stream.
Yeah, once you're the Google that has movies made about it and Silicon Valley loosely based upon it, you can't go back to like a mom and pop organization. Like that's not how it works. Like once you're a giant machine, you're not then going to be like, you know what, let's go back to our roots.
So what we're hoping is that someone like Ronaldo would come in and just sort of, now he operates the machine, but in a way that sort of has his eye on different things than maybe Sunil Gulati did.
Yeah, and then it is worth noting and is rather telling that of all the names mentioned, none of them happen to be female, which is sort of a worrying thing, given that you could argue that the women's side of the game is the one thing that's been consistently successful for the United States. I think Grant Wahl threw out Julie Foudy's name, but I can't really speak to like how much involvement she's had in the governing of U.S. soccer in the past couple of years, so I don't really know how likely of a candidate she really is.
Here's the thing as well, we don't fully know exactly what a U.S. soccer presidency is and should look like, right? Because do you remember my interview with Noah Davis about he profiled Sunil Gulati for Howler magazine?
Yep.
And essentially, when elected, it was it still is an unpaid position and somewhat ceremonial and administrative, but it's been turned into sort of a power position because Sunil Gulati has accumulated power as president of US Soccer.
Yeah.
So I actually don't know. Say it's Eric Ronaldo, right? And maybe he's all for pro-rel, for example. Could Eric Ronaldo come in and be like, all right, gather around, folks, we're doing pro-rel, and here's how we're going to do it? And could he sort of dictate from the top how to do that? Could the board of directors overrule him? Could the national council, which is all, the regional coaches, overrule him? Like, would the president even have the authority to make those sweeping changes?
I mean, I would go even one step before that and say, if you have a policy that you like that the board isn't going to like, I would assume that U.S. Soccer Board of Directors does not want pro-rel, for example. Then do they even let a candidate who is pro-rel really run or be seriously considered or ever vote for him? Probably not. And that in and of itself is kind of frustrating.
So the deadline to register your candidacy, we looked this up, is 60 days before the election. The election is early February, so you'd have to register by early December, which isn't that far away. So we'll know for sure who's running. And the reason we've talked more about Ronaldo is because obviously we kind of know him as a personality. Steve Gantz, Paul Lapointe, and I'm sorry I didn't write down his first name, Mr. Mata. We don't know much about their platforms, right? But if we do get a situation where Sunil Gulati says, I'm not running, or even if he does run, but there's a determination that someone runs against him, it will really be a thing of like, here's my vision for US soccer going forward. And then people being, the National Council, right? So it's a good number of people vote for that vision. But it almost be like a presidential debate, right? Where you will get competing visions for what the future should look like, and we'll get to hear about them. And we won't get to vote, but other people will get to vote.
Yep. And with all that said, I'm cynical, whatever you want to go with. I think Sunil Gulati gets elected to his final term.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
Do you really?
Yep. And I'll say why. I think it's because he's going to hold the 2026 bid hostage. I could just see that as that sort of like, because it hasn't been awarded yet, he has been the main figure in making that happen. Yes, he's appealed with the head of the Canadian FA and the head of the Mexican FA. Yeah. But it hasn't been like officially decided yet. Morocco have like interest in there too, and I could just see that sort of like little leverage of like, oh, it's a shame because I don't know, because we've seen him glad handing, we've seen him be heavily involved, like in the election of Infantino, for example. And Sunil Gulati like left the room and had a private meeting for a while and came back in prior to like the second round of voting. So I could see
he goes to work around the room, kind of like Bruce Wayne, like getting his company back.
Well, no, but I could just see him sort of like...
Also, spoiler alert for the Christopher Nolan Batman.
Yeah, there is that. I think you're safe there. But it's just more so I could see him like using that influence as a way to say like, well, you know, I don't know if Eric Ronaldo's going to be able to like have the same impact. Maybe we lose the World Cup, but it's up to you. Like, you know, that's my only hesitation there. That's why I feel like that might stay as it is, and he'll then say all the things he needs to say about appointing a new manager and a new technical director, and we're going to move forward in a new direction, and blah, 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 and we'll see where we end up.
All right, speaking of moving forward, I think we should dedicate the second half of this show to just like maybe looking kind of quickly, but, you know, with some detail, because we've done our research, at various areas of US soccer that could do with a bit of a shake-up or a bit of a change, maybe in the light of the US not qualifying for the World Cup. But first, how about some retail therapy?
Sure, that works for me, which is, I think, Daryl's way of segueing into the fact that we have a sponsor for today's show, and that sponsor is Brooklyn's first sneaker company, Greats.
Great, Italian-made, New York-based. This is Greats' fifth ad.
I'm just going to say right now, based on that description alone, Greats should be the new manager of the U.S. national team. Like Italian-based, they've got origins and Italian tactics and approach, but they're based in New York, so they've got that familiarity with the United States. Greats, get on it. I don't know if they play 4-4-2. If so, they're out.
So Greats make high-quality sneakers with classic styles for both men and women. As I mentioned, they've been supporting the Total Soccer Show. This is their fifth ad. It's also the final ad of the current campaign, so it's the final chance you'll get to use the discount code at greats.com. And Greats sent us some sneakers, so I can attest. You're wearing them.
I'm wearing them.
I'm not wearing mine, and I'll tell you why. Because they've been promoted.
What does that mean?
They've been promoted to kind of like my top division of sneakers.
Oh, so you only wear them occasionally?
Which means like I'm not going to bike to the office in them, for example. Like I'm keeping them for best, essentially. I'm keeping them for when I know I don't dress up much, right? But when I sort of dress up and hang with the cool kids, I think I'll be wearing my Greats.
What are you, Larry David? Your formal sneakers?
They are my formal sneakers. Do you not think of them that way? Like they're not sort of like I'm just wearing some. To know another athletic shoe, I'm just wearing because I biked here. And,
I have that.
It's kind of raining a bit today, and you get them kind of muddy. Like I'm not going to do that to my Greats. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm not proud of this fact, but it's usually my former indoor soccer shoes. I tend to buy them so that they could be worn socially if need be.
Relegated after they've been like worn out and indoor. They get relegated,
and yours get promoted. Interesting approach.
So that's my take on Greats. Is they are they've been promoted to my top division.
My take on Greats is that they make me look fashionable because I don't know much about sneakers. I tend to buy like the kind of the same thing every time. The ones they sent me were a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I basically continue I continue to get compliments on them.
Oh, because they're bright white.
Yeah, they are, and also they forced me to diversify what I tend to go black. I'm all black usually. Black pants, black shoes, black shirt. But when you wear white shoes, you kind of mix it up a little bit. Yeah. And so they've helped with that. A little more color in the wardrobe.
So they've made you shift your perspective.
A little bit. Yeah.
All right, so as we mentioned, this is the final ad for Greats in this campaign, which means that this is your final chance to use the discount code at greats.com. The discount code is Total Soccer Show, all one word, all lowercase. Use that at checkout at greats.com and you'll get 15% off. Taylor, would you remind our listeners of that URL?
Sure, it's greats.com. Find the footwear that makes you feel like what the U.S. could have felt like if they qualified for the World Cup. Too much of a bummer. Enter the promo code Total Soccer Show, all one word, all lowercase, at checkout to get 50% off your order.
The link will be in the show notes.
And I kind of stuttered over that one, so I'm going to say one more time, 15% off. Don't want to hype it up and say 50. Yeah. I mentioned, so again, thank you to Greats. I mentioned earlier Curb Your Enthusiasm. Have you watched any of the new season yet?
I haven't.
Outstanding first episode.
Really?
That's all I have to say.
Pretty good.
Oh, he does that one. That definitely comes up.
Okay, so we came in here today with the idea of we'd look back and then we'd look forward, right? First, we've already looked forward to possibly the next US soccer president and who it might be. I'd like to maybe talk about what we would like that US soccer president to do. And by that I mean, it doesn't all have to fall into the president's sort of jurisdiction. What are some realistic changes that could be made to US soccer in the near future? And the reason I say that is because this is going to be like, 25 minutes ago now, but I said that I think the problems with the Hex qualifying campaign are micro in terms of, player selection and coaching personnel, coaching decisions. as opposed to the whole US soccer system is terrible and we need to get rid of it. But what I would say is that there are tweaks that can be made to improve things, and this is an opportunity to do it, because when you don't qualify for a World Cup, everyone sort of looks in the mirror. It's a period for sort of self-reflection, examination, and you can think about changes that can be made. It's an opportunity to get things changed.
And with that, I'm going to approach it from a cynical perspective, and I'm going to say strictly from a I think this would be good because it would be the right thing to do, but strictly from a political standpoint, the obvious answer in my mind is to promote equal pay between men and women's teams. That's it. Because really, if you do that, you immediately...
Norway just did it, right?
Yes, I think it was Norway, and I think that required the men's team to take a pay cut. Maybe Denmark did that as well. I can't remember. But it's the easiest way to really obviously differentiate yourself from Sunil Gulati, because he so publicly was enmeshed in the debate over equal pay and then U.S. soccer. What was your point about one nation, one team, but maybe play on a worse field? And so I feel like if you kind of publicly promoted
one nation, one team, two standards of field.
There it is. And if you publicly promoted the idea of nope, no more turf, everyone's getting equal pay, that equally, while it is the right thing to do from a political standpoint, it puts you immediately on a level that I think Sunil Gulati wishes he could be on.
Yes, okay, so I 100% agree with that. But also, I am specifically thinking here of how do we improve the US men's national team.
Yeah, so with that in mind, my first answer is to appoint a technical director as a full-time position, except I don't know what that means. But that seems like a thing that everybody wants, a specific technical director to technically direct everything. So I guess appoint a technical director, or maybe promote Tab Ramos to be the technical director, but then have that be a clearly defined position.
I think of Tab Ramos, I kind of like the situation right now where Tab Ramos is youth technical director, and then we just know what his sort of portfolio is. It's to develop the youth national teams, and that's what he does, right? A technical director for a US national team then, I'm with you. I don't know what they would be doing. You can say they would set the vision, but I don't know what that means either.
It makes me think, again, complete speculation, and maybe with that in mind, another reason why I don't love what Sunil Gulati has done is that I think a big part of it was that Gulati was initially rejected by Jurgen Klinsmann. That's why Bob Bradley became the permanent manager. He went back, and I think part of it was that he agreed to give him complete autonomy. And it almost makes me think that it was sort of you saying, yes, other podcast, I'll take a job, but I want my own building to do it in. And they're like, fine, that's the technical director building now where Daryl does his podcast. I feel like it was a further level of insulation that allowed Klinsmann to do what he wants, but it never really meant anything. But now there's this position that seems like it's important, even though no one really knows what it does.
I wouldn't be surprised if no one is ever appointed to that position.
Okay, so then you would say make the youth technical director. Would you just keep it as it is? Would you make it more of a front and center position? Would you want there to be clearly stated objectives? What would you go with there, or would you say it's not that important?
I'd say it's fine as it is right now, because I am kind of the opinion that if you look at the last couple youth tournaments, the last U20s making the quarterfinals, you look at some of the quality of players coming through. If you look at the U17s right now, they'll play I think they play Thursday morning against Colombia, but they're already through the group stage of the U17 World Cup after beating India and Ghana.
That is more than a lot of other U17 teams can say.
And I'm kind of pivoting here because I know there's a lot of different stuff to talk about. I feel quite positive about the future of US youth national teams. And that's why I'm not really into all these arguments I'm seeing that we need to sort of come up with a new way of developing youth talent in this country.
So if only there was a way to categorize a group of people from born in the same time period who maybe didn't reach their full potential or were never maybe that good to begin with.
So there's a great Brian Sciaretta article for American Soccer Now. I'm not sure if he actually uses the phrase lost generation, but that's what people have been calling it. And it's essentially the players that would be kind of in their peak-ish now, 24 to 27, should have been the core of the US national team right now, but there just aren't that many of them, right? They aren't. There's a lot of older guys and younger guys, right? And if you look back, that's the group of players that sort of didn't qualify for the past two Olympics, didn't qualify for a U20 World Cup, did poorly, or didn't qualify to U17 World Cup. There's almost you can see this age group move through the age groups and then come to this 2018 World Cup and then not qualify. And it's not all their fault, but it means that the current players sort of would have had extra talent. Again, should have qualified with this group of talent, right?
And I can't remember if this was him, if this was the initial article, or if this was him kind of revisiting that as another kind of...
He published this in September, I think.
Yeah, but I think then
early October.
But then when he wrote what went wrong with the US team, he kind of referenced it. And I can't remember if it was in the reference or in the original article that if you're having trouble grasping what we're talking about or who we're talking about, the image used was Breck Shea. Like, so there you go. Right. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about players who, like...
would have been in their prime right now.
Yeah, or seem like they were destined for big things, capable of very big things, but for whatever reason, didn't end up achieving that and now aren't in this squad.
But when you look at the current situation, the current group of players... they are the beneficiaries of the development academy system, which was set up 10 years ago, coming to maturity. Right? I think some of these guys, like Breck Shea and all those other guys, were at the early end. Their development came at the early end of the development academy. The guys coming through now, the Tyler Adams, the Andrew Carlton, Josh Sargent, they've come through development academies which are so mature that US Soccer closed down the U17 residency program because they no longer thought that to get the best out of the elite players, they had to bring them all to Bradenton. They thought that the MLS clubs' development academies and the other development academies, like where Josh Sargent was, were like advanced enough and doing a good enough job that will provide for the future of the United States because those systems had matured. So my argument is, don't blame this 2018 World Cup failure. Don't take that failure and blow up the development academy system. Blow up meaning, dismantle, when it's just about to bear fruit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So then my question then becomes, though, like, I have a hard time just believing that, like, all of these players born in these couple of years were just bad. And so maybe it was a lack of development academy. Maybe it was a lack of, like dedicated training resources or whatever. But it's still... does it have to be somebody's fault? Because I feel like it does.
It can be a systemic fault, right? That maybe the coaching quality and the hours of coaching and the methodology wasn't there, like in the age groups for this age group, because we were in the weird transition between no development academy and development academy. And I haven't looked into this in so much detail that I can definitely give you the dates of when the switchover was and what the education was before that and after that. All I know is that the current group who've come through that look like much more complete and confident players. Like when I see Tyler Adams running around a soccer field, I think there's the future of the US national team.
But this is why Daryl Grove could run for office. Because my question was going to be basically, because I do feel like a lot of people point to Jurgen Klinsmann, who was the technical director, who said, like, our biggest priority is qualifying for the Olympics, and then they didn't qualify, and Sunil Gulati, who, like, oversees everything and appointed Jurgen Klinsmann. But then my question was then going to be, but if you're blaming them for that, do you then have to give them credit for the state of things now?
Possibly.
But since you're not blaming them for the first thing, you don't necessarily have to give them credit for the second thing.
And again, I don't know...
So way to anticipate.
I don't know who gets the credit for the development academy system and the adding the extra national teams. That was a big thing, right? That we suddenly have also like I think a U16, U17, U18, U19, U20 national team instead of just U17, U20, right? The national teams are all age groups so that more players get more time with a national team setup. That definitely helps them. I believe that was a Klinsmann innovation, right? And again, this is like an offshoot of things can be two things. Jurgen Klinsmann doesn't have to be some great Satan that everything he touched turned to dust, right? There can be good things that he did, and then he picked a bad tactical lineup for certain games and we were really unhappy about it, right? But there can be things that he pushed US Soccer to do that can have long-term benefits that we can be really happy about. You don't have to pick sides and say everything he touches is terrible, whereas everything the next guy touches is gold.
Jurgen can be spy things?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
But it's true, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm arguing is things have been put in place that will bear fruit in the future, and you can see it just over the horizon, right? It's Weston McKennie, it's Tyler Adams, it's all these guys.
Yeah, it's just really difficult to do that right now.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the reality. Is like it's tough to say, but in the future everything's going to be better because we do have young talents coming through when the talents of today aren't going to the World Cup and we won't be seeing them there. And sorry, I feel like I've taken us off track. We started this sort of second half of the show by saying we're going to get to like small changes that could be made, right? One of the changes I would make is with Major League Soccer. And before we get into like, I don't know if we're going to touch on like pro rel and all that single entity and all that kind of stuff, but one of the changes that could be made is making sure somehow that the players that get homegrown player contracts that come through development academies get more minutes in Major League Soccer. Yeah. I don't know how we do that. Honestly, you could put like more incentives in terms of how the roster is built to make sure that like maybe you get more allocation money if you play more homegrown players. You know what I mean? Maybe there's like a bonus system for playing your homegrown players so that Paxton Pomykal maybe got on the field more for FC Dallas this year. Yes.
Right?
And I think, listeners, I'm making a face, and so I'm wondering if Daryl's reacting to that. But the face I'm making is because we talked off air about did we want to promise what I'm about to promise, and now I'm about to promise it even though I said I did not.
Yeah, go for it.
Which is that I think what we are then going to try to do, because we're going to talk a little bit about a bunch of different things right now, and I think...
This is going to be a long show, by the way.
And I think a lot of those conversations are going to end with, I don't know, so we'll have to see. Mm-hmm. And I think what that means is that we're going to try to kind of revisit certain topics in depth over like one show or a couple shows. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Pro Rel, we both have some thoughts on it. We're going to get to that in a minute. But then maybe those thoughts, like, it's going to end with like, maybe if there were a way to make sure that young American homegrown players get more minutes. But how do we make that happen? I don't know, but I like the idea. But on a future show, we're going to come back to it and try to figure out a way that maybe we could make that work.
Are you picturing a future where we set that's going to be the show for a few days' time, and then you and I go and do our research and come up with some ideas and some proposals for how you could guarantee that homegrown players get more minutes in Major League Soccer?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't love that, honestly. I really don't, because I feel like once... I hope this makes sense, but once you become pro something, then that's what you are. And it is this sort of I think I am more inclined than ever to say that the United States needs promotion relegation.
Yeah.
I think I've always thought we did, but I never thought
it.
I never thought it was a reality, and now I feel like I don't care if it's a reality. I think it would be useful. But I then don't want it to be this thing where then every time, see, this is why it wouldn't work. I don't want it to be like, see, you're the number one advocate for it. Obviously, I'm not the number one advocate. We both know who it is. But I just, that doesn't mean that we're locked into this thing that this is firmly what we believe forever. It is an idea that we think could work, but we are always open to other suggestions and change.
So maybe one show we could do is a realistic version of implementing promotion relegation.
Yeah. I mean, I am down for that. I just don't want it to then be like, here's why you're totally wrong. It's that's fine. We can be totally wrong.
So here it is. It's got to be about solutions and not problems, right?
Yep.
Anyone can outline the problems of why single entity can be damaging.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to then say, okay, how do we get from here, from October 2017, to a future where there's a workable version of Pro Rel that doesn't dismantle the whole American soccer system and end us in some sort of wasteland.
Yeah.
Right? And it's possible, but it would take a lot of thought and a lot of very careful treading.
Yes. And I think it's worthwhile, and I think it's necessary, because to your point about young homegrown players, a kind of consistent refrain I saw online in relation to the United States being eliminated is that the players who scored the goals for Panama and Honduras that eliminated the United States are MLS players.
Yep.
And there's this argument to be made.
Torres and Roman Torres.
Yeah, and Albert Ellis, I think, as well, or at least,
yeah.
So I think when you look at it, or maybe Kyoto.
I think Kyoto also scored.
Yeah, good
They
Lord.
both scored.
Oh, boy. So, but I think, so then there was this argument that, that's great, Major League Soccer has helped some American players, but it's really helped CONCACAF opposition get stronger. And so if you can find a way to really help the league promote and grow domestic talent, I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow anybody else in.
But this is what we run into, right? If you start having quotas or you start saying no to Honduran players, then that's a weird political thing that I'm not too keen on doing.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where we don't want to go.
Didn't Turkey have a horrible situation where they sort of mandated that every team had to start X number of Turkish players in the Turkish Super League?
Yep.
And it ended up being that it did not work out because players started taking their place in the team for granted, for example, and they abandoned it because they were not seeing any positive results. So you got to be really careful going down routes like that.
And it
sends a bad message as well.
It also was probably the Exhibit A in the case of England implementing some sort of quota like that, because number one, it then makes Turkish players in this system become so ridiculously overpriced that only the most wealthy clubs can afford them, but it's also then the most wealthy clubs pillaging other smaller clubs to get their best players.
They maybe would have got minutes anyway because they were a talented young player.
Yeah, but now, because I can't even remember if it was they had to start.
You've got to be so careful when you start tinkering with the system.
Yeah, but then it was I think you had to have X number of players in your matchday squad. So then you're just bringing in these really exciting young Turkish players and sitting them on the bench because you want to play, I don't know, Felipe Melo instead. And it leads to problems for any number of reasons. Chiefly, you're starting Felipe Melo.
Okay, another thing we should hit on, because we're going to hit a lot of topics here, is pay to play. That was another big topic of, the US needs to stop doing pay to play. And even though, with everything I've just said about how I think the current system is producing a talent and a future where Chris Durkin's going to be bossing a US men's national team midfield, and we can be kind of optimistic about that and we shouldn't destroy it, I also believe that ending pay to play would open the US soccer system up to more and more talented kids.
Yeah.
But the question always is, how do you do that?
Right.
Because again, you've got to be very careful.
No, I think what we should do is just say we want to do it, and then have it be, we'll propose a bill that says, we're going to end pay to play. And that's pretty much it. It'll work itself out. We'll be fine.
So I did a whole pay-to-play podcast with Will Parchman for the Top Draw Soccer Show. By the way, our other show, Top Draw Soccer Show, if you're interested in youth development stuff, every episode is about youth development. Top Draw Soccer Show, Top Draw Soccer is all one word if you want to find it in iTunes. There's about 10 to 12 episodes now, each focused on a different topic, right? And one of them being pay-to-play. And one of the things that really came through to me researching and recording that episode is if you ended pay-to-play, there are a lot of clubs around the country that would go out of business very quickly, and you'd have free soccer, but also in many places, no soccer.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, absolutely. Or a very...
So you can't snap your fingers and say end pay-to-play without causing an awful lot of damage.
Yeah, because it's not even just the absence of soccer. It then becomes the absence of quality soccer, and then you've got a bunch
absence of coaches.
Yeah.
Like,
more on that in a minute. But,
really?
And I think what it ends up being for me with all of these issues is they're all sort of linked. That if you want to get rid of pay-to-play, you kind of need promotion relegation because then it gives clubs a reason to like find other ways to make money because there's the opportunity that you could progress. If you're a player, and we talked about this off air, but like say here in Virginia, if you're in Fredericksburg or Charlottesville, like your options are limited. You can play for a high-level club and then go to college. Maybe you can get a homegrown player contract with DC United, since I think we're in their catchment area.
But
your options are limited. But if there is a Charlottesville team that can eventually play their way up theoretically into Major League Soccer, you go play for that Charlottesville team. You stay where you are. You work your way up.
Well, it's the other solution to pay-to-play.
Yeah.
Actually, there are two possible solutions here. The one big solution would be to somehow be like Europe and have clubs that are so big and have so much money that they can fund their own academies without taking money from the kids that come in, right? Like Real Madrid have their academy and it's paid for with Real Madrid money because there's a lot of Real Madrid money. They can afford to do it, right? They're not worried about kids paying their fees because that's not what is funding the whole operation. Yep. But to do that, again, you would need clubs to be individual entities, not franchises of Major League Soccer. You'd need to end pro rel. That's a whole, again, it's all tied together. It's really, really hard to do.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because the other thing that's worth noting here is that like clubs aren't just going to do that out of the goodness of their heart. Like they're not just going to be like, you're right, we don't need to make money anymore because it's more like no one does that. But also literally no one does that. As in the players or the clubs in Spain, they're still making money. Like they are still a for-profit entity, and the way they're making money is either they are Real Madrid and they are winning titles and having tons of sponsors, or they're a smaller club and they're selling their players on. But in the United States, you don't really have that sort of situation where, say, Christian Pulisic's hometown club gets money because Borussia Dortmund signed him. You don't have that system in place.
But you should, right?
You should,
Solidarity
absolutely.
payments are a thing that US Soccer have been avoiding paying for youth teams. There would be a lot of teams that could possibly fund themselves by having the payment that you get when your player goes professional or your player moves from team to team and you get a cut of that. That's how a lot of youth teams who are not affiliated with professional clubs and not funded by professional clubs are funded. That is another thing that if I saw a US Soccer president running, I would want to see that on their platform. Sort of a reverse in position on what the US Soccer policy has been.
Yeah, and I want to say I cannot remember, we talked about this again, I cannot remember who it was, but there was a player who moved this summer or last, and it was basically the way all of the like sell-on clauses and contracts worked was that eventually like the club that they had played for when they were like 12 got a ridiculous amount of money for that club, and that will keep them in business for the next like 10 years. Because that one player achieved at such a high level. You don't have that in the United States.
That's an extreme example, but you could have a steady flow of like 20 grand here, 10 grand there. That would, and enough of that. Or, one big payday of 200,000 from a player signing a big contract. That could be enough to keep a youth team going. Again, this is something that maybe we should research in even more detail because I can't remember all my notes from the original Will Parchman show on Top Draw Soccer. Maybe go listen to it.
But I will say that if you change it up, even just a little bit, because like we looked at like Richmond United here, and I think what was the like per season fee was like $2,800,
$2,900.
$2,900. So 2 seasons a year, you're looking at almost $6,000.
Yeah.
Right. And my question then becomes like, is that necessary? And I don't even mean like if you go with a like pay to play model, if you have to. Does it need to be $3,000, or is that what the market dictates, and therefore that's what
so
it
I know,
is?
for example, the Kickers, who, full disclosure, we've done some work for because we did their play-by-play commentary. They're our local team. They're a non-profit. It's not as if there's some big bank vault where all this money is going in the end. I think, honestly, that price is set at a point where it's to keep the club, to make sure. And again, Richmond United is the academy. It's the strikers and the kickers combined. But that has to be funded, and that pay for the coaches and all of that good stuff. And I think the Kickers would be very annoyed if we didn't mention that U16 and U18, because those are the like really competitive development academy age groups, those ages are free for Richmond United.
All right.
But the other ages aren't.
I guess that's fair, and that's a very good explanation. And I won't do, but I would just say...
Because of what Ned Stark says.
Yes. But it's mostly just because I do find myself wondering with some of the fees that we see if that's like absolutely necessary or if it is sort of soccer becoming a business. Mm-hmm. And moving away from like the academies for a second, I'll look at, for example, a thing Matt Doyle pointed out was that just licensed coaches, that to get your E and F license, not that expensive. I think E online, A, B, C, D, E, F, F. To get your F license online is like $25, I think. Mm-hmm. But if you want to keep moving up, so I have a friend who got his B license, which is obviously, I don't know if you know this, Daryl, but B, one below A.
Yeah.
And without naming names, he said things get really pricey once you hit C level. C was around $1,000 plus you have to travel for that more often than not because it's only held in specific locations. To get your B, you're looking at $1,500, but again, you've got to travel, so it's closer to $2,500. So what that leads to is, I think Doyle's point was that it's like for every A licensed coach, it's like one coach to every 6,000 players in the United States. That's ridiculous.
So that's the thing that US soccer could subsidize or just make cheaper or invest in making cheaper and more available.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, and the same goes for, honestly, for referees, that you could make referee courses. I think you used to have to pay to become a referee, but you can make that free. Maybe you don't, but you could also pay them better. You could have more subsidies to finance more referees. You could give them incentives for, like, if you don't get complaints filed against you. You could try to, because that's another aspect of the game. You have better referees, the standard of play increases because we've played in games where it was so inconsistent that you don't really know. You can't really play the same way you do from one game to the next. If you get a little bit more standardized and a higher training, it works out for everybody, namely the referees, because now they're making more money to get screamed at on Sundays.
Bless all the referees.
Truth.
It is the hardest job.
It is. And I wish I didn't yell at them, but sometimes I do, and I apologize. And I always apologize afterwards. I really do, I think. I hope. I apologize if I didn't.
What about college soccer? Do you even want to go there?
Sure.
I mean, it's a part of the system.
It is.
That some people would point to as, a lot like DeAndre Yedlin went and played at Akron, right? Mm-hmm. That's a year of his development happened there. A lot of other players maybe go there. There's a chance that maybe they become better players if they were playing professionally somewhere instead. That is part of the US soccer system. Is there anything we could do to tweak
there you go.
NCAA?
My trepidation is not, I dismiss college soccer. I think college soccer is incredibly important. I theoretically played it. But I would say the problem that you run into with college soccer is that it's not just college soccer, it's the NCAA. Mm-hmm. They have a very vested interest in not having things change. For example, players not getting subsidies or getting paid at all or any sort of salary, because if you pay the soccer players or the field hockey players or the lacrosse players, you got to pay the football players and the basketball players, and that becomes a huge financial issue.
And if US soccer starts sort of intruding on how the NCAA runs their business and says, hey, countdown clocks are weird or whatever, if they sort of get in there, then there's a chance for, say, the NBA to get in on NCAA basketball and all that kind of stuff. So I get why that's problematic. So are there any tweaks that you can think of?
I mean, with what you've just said, limit. I mean, see, it's tough though, because I would say the one that comes in my head is yes, change the clock. Number two is limit substitutions, and I think they've changed it a little bit since I played. That now, if you leave in one half, you can't re-enter in that same half, but you can re-enter later on in the game. But and so on the surface, I would say, but that's silly because it doesn't really prepare you for professional level. But on the other hand, it means more people get more minutes, and then you're kind of giving players more opportunities than they would otherwise have. So again, it's a slippery slope, and it's difficult to really know what is the right approach.
Okay, this might be a little controversial. There's also the argument that you need a lot of players. The reason they go to the development academy to get good at soccer at 16 to 18 is not to play for the US national team or even to play professionally. For some people, it's like at least the sort of medium-term goal is to get a college scholarship so that you can afford to go to college, right? So one of the things that gets to is the same as the pay-to-play model, is that it's a very American system, right? Yeah. We're in a country where healthcare costs a fortune, public education, like in some cities and counties, is in bad shape, and people have to go to private school to sort of guarantee their kids an education. It's kind of the way American society is tilted right now. So to say you want to end pay to play, you're talking about changing a thing that has grown out of the way American society is set up.
I mean, and
I'm just saying that to say what a big thing it is to just say we should end pay to play. It's a very complicated thing. It's like saying, healthcare should be free at the point of service. I mean, maybe, but it's very, very hard to do.
But I mean, it goes back to your point. It goes back to everything is linked, because the reality is, like, what I would say is it would be great if we got more people playing high-level college or even D3 soccer because it keeps more people playing the game that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. But in a lot of cases, how do you get scouted by colleges? How do they know who you are? You go to college showcases and major tournaments. Those cost money. Those are pay-to-play systems. Like if you're a bunch of kids who don't have that many opportunities, you're not going to go to those tournaments because you're not going to be able. If you're playing in Virginia, for example, you're not going to go to like California or Florida to play in these major invitations or the Dallas Cup in Texas. You're not going to have that money to do that, so you're not going to get seen. So that pretty much ends your career there unless you go play community college or you try out for local teams. Like it's a very limited opportunity because you have pay-to-play systems in place.
And that's the thing, systems in place. Yep. And it's not like anyone can just click their fingers and change that easily, right? It's possible, but it's a. I feel like I'm banging on this a little too much. People maybe don't want to hear it, so I'll try and move on.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing we haven't talked about is the next US national team coach.
Yep.
Yeah. So we sort of started talking about Bruce Arena. I feel like this is a thing where he's either going to resign or be fired very soon. We've heard that friendlies are being planned. Friendly games are being planned for November. You're going to need a coach for that. Yep. I can't imagine it's going to be Bruce Arena because what would be the point of him sticking around? So the question becomes...
I will say, I don't think that he wants to quit. I really don't. I think that just like I was talking about with Sunil Gulati, I think he knows what this does to his reputation. You don't want to be the coach that ends there. Now. No, but you can be the one who
unless he can persuade someone that Panama-Costa Rica game needs to be replayed because that goal did not cross the line.
No.
There's no way the US is going to the World Cup.
But I got to find a shorter way to explain this. But we've talked about this before where there's the point in the book or the movie where the villain knows they're sort of defeated, but it's that last ditch, but if I can get to the escape pod, I'll and then they're get killed by the laser. There's always that moment, and I feel like that's where we are with some of the people that we've talked about tonight, that it's but if I can get those two friendlies, if I just get that time and I give Weston McKennie a cap and I call up Tyler, and I call up all these young players.
Too late, right?
But I feel like that is sort of the mentality of I can fix it if you give me a little more time.
Oh, so he's not a villain, but Will Smith in I Am Legend.
Yeah,
have you seen
I just
that?
need more time.
He keeps saying, I can fix this, right?
I hate that movie so much.
Do you really?
Because I love that book so much, yeah.
All right, don't let me sidetrack us with weird pop culture stuff.
It's cool. Sometimes they're vampires and sometimes they're zombies for some reason. Whatever. Yeah, so I just feel like...
Zombies.
So I feel like maybe he has that idea of I can fix it, just give me some time, and he doesn't necessarily want to walk away. But
that's not happening, right? He's going to resign or be fired. There's going to be a different coach in charge.
Those are two very different things, is all I'm getting at.
Okay,
yeah.
So let's talk about who we would like to see up next for the US men's national team.
I mean, who we would like to see or who's a possibility? Because there's lots of names that have been thrown out, and they're all, I would say they're in 3 camps, which is like MLS coaches, realistic gets, and completely unrealistic gets. So which one do you want to go with first?
Let's go MLS coaches, because that seems the possibility, right? Because it could be MLS season ends in December, and then coaches are available to be called up for US national team duty. So it's maybe Peter Vermees, it's Oscar Pareja, there's another name I keep hearing, and it's not coming to me right now.
So the other ones that keep getting brought up, Caleb Porter, Greg Vanny has been mentioned a couple times.
I mean, they're the best team in MLS right now.
Yep. So and then the two that I would say are kind of on the outside, I would give them long odds as MLS coaches becoming U.S. national team managers are Patrick Vieira and Tata Martino.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But I feel like they're both just getting going with their MLS team.
Yeah. But I mean, I could see why it would be appealing to have Tata Martino for any number of different reasons.
Same with Vieira.
I think he's probably the one that I would most like to see, to be honest.
Really?
I'm sorry, Atlanta fans. I know you don't want to hear that.
So, okay, are we talking long-term appointment here? Are we talking short-term appointment?
I mean, I think this is my honest, candid answer is this reminds me of when Sir Alex Ferguson retired from Manchester United, and I kept being who's the next manager who's going to be there for 26 years? And you're like, that's not going to happen. You're just not going to stop thinking like that.
Oh, I think that's you?
And I think, I think that's where I am with this, is I'm more worried about who is going to bring in young players, appeal to a wide base of people who's going to make people want to continue to play for the U.S. national team and get the results and bring in a system that is capable of being executed and having success. That's where I am with it.
Okay, I want to cut through all this because I think I know what's going to happen.
What's that?
Because Sunil Gulati...
Oh, yeah, I mean, interim manager? Yeah, let's do it.
Because Sunil Gulati is not going to be either confirmed for another term, which, as you said, is very possible, or replaced by someone else in February 2018, there's no point appointing a permanent coach right now if you're going to have a new president who has new ideas in February 2018, right? So it makes sense to me that, especially if you would want to bring some young players into the US national team in the short term, because there's really nothing to play for, right, in November. There's just maybe to give us some optimism for the future. The obvious choice is Tab Ramos on an interim basis, because he's already on US soccer staff as the youth technical director. There's no U20 tournament coming up because that's the team he sort of head coaches. He may as well take over the full national team as a stopgap in the meantime. And then, if he does really well and everyone's feeling really positive about it, there's a chance that he's appointed full-time in February or, after that by the next guy.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of people think is going to happen because it's the most logical course of action, because it's the easiest course of action. I'd say you promote a person who's already there, but has that familiarity.
Does that make it a bad idea? It's just that it's the easiest course of action. Like I said, he's already employed there, so that's a reason to do it. That's not particularly revolutionary.
It doesn't make it a bad idea, but it doesn't make it a good idea. It's an idea, and it's the logical idea. I would say that, no, that doesn't fill me with, incredible amounts of excitement. But to be perfectly honest, none of the names that are realistic possibilities, I would say, are. I don't mean to disrespect any of the MLS names you've mentioned, but I don't know if it would work. I don't know if it translates that well. You have to have a little more national team experience. That is part of the reason why Martino appeals to me, because he has that with Paraguay. Yeah. So there's that to it.
Argentina?
Yes. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, sure. I have to add, I think my favorite thing, the point where I was like, I'm not reading any more of these articles, was when someone suggested Juan Carlos Osorio, and the specific reasoning was...
Didn't he just qualify for a World Cup with Mexico?
Well, the argument was you need somebody who appeals to the huge percentage of Spanish-speaking young players in this country who could choose to play elsewhere or don't play for the United States for whatever reason. He could appeal to them, especially being a Mexican himself. Nope, he's Colombian. Yeah. and appealing to such a broad Mexican audience, nope, he does not. They still want him fired. So that was kind of ridiculous, and that's where I was like, okay, we're just reaching now. Got it. Cool. Awesome.
So the other reason I'm actually coming around on this Tab Ramos idea is if, as I want the November friendlies to be kind of a coming out party for the next generation of US talent, and not necessarily Andrew Carlton, right, because he's very, very young, but guys who have played in MLS like Tyler Adams, guys who are playing first-team football in the Bundesliga like Weston McKennie, then Tab Ramos is a guy who knows those guys, right? As in, it would be very easy for Tyler Adams to make his US national team debut under Tab Ramos because he knows him and has already played for him. It would feel more comfortable. So it would make sense in this weird transition period.
Yeah, I think so. And especially because this weird transition period is... a long transition period. It's 18 months until the United States plays a competitive game again, basically.
Really? What will that be, the Gold Cup?
I believe so.
Yeah. Oh, should we talk about the future of the... I know we're going long, but there's a lot to talk about again. Talk about the future of...
Before we do, because you're going to go to competitive tournaments and games the United States needs, I want to say this. To the people who are saying, these guys have got to be gone, this old guy...
Oh, let's talk about this. I want to talk about this.
Because... I disagree with you, but I'll also say if that's if you are strongly of that belief, get ready to be disappointed and get ready to be angry, because it does not matter who the coach is. If it's Tab Ramos, they're going to call in some of those people that you don't like because he's seen them, he's been around them. You have to have a little bit of that consistency. And if it's a new coach, you're going to see those players at some point because you have 18 months until your next competitive game. If you're, for example, I've seen Thomas Tuchel thrown around. That's one of the long shots, I would say. Carlo Ancelotti the same. It is not as though Ancelotti, Tuchel, or Bielsa is the other one who people always mention. They have a huge depth of knowledge about U.S. players or American players. So if it's one of them, if it's somebody new, they're going to want to see all the players they can before they start to narrow it down to their kind of core 30 or whatever it might be, which means they're going to bring in the new exciting players. They're also going to bring in the players that a lot of people think aren't going to be there anymore. So I'm just saying, prepare yourselves if you're of that opinion.
I'm also of the opinion that just because everyone is very disappointed and let down by this group of guys that did not get us to the World Cup, it doesn't mean that we should say, you're done, you're done, you're done. Right? For example, I've seen it already multiple times. Michael Bradley should never play for the US national team again. Michael Bradley is 30 years old. Michael Bradley has at least 2, 3, 4 years of soccer at an international level. Right? Maybe we have to think about who we partner him with and we can try different things, but it would be much more helpful to see Michael Bradley alongside Weston McKennie than just Weston McKennie thrown in alongside someone else. Right?
Yeah.
So there's no reason to jettison everything you've got just because you're disappointed with what happened. I think the guys we won't see again are the guys who will naturally retire. Like, for example, Tim Howard. Right? Tim Howard was He already took that break. He's back with the US national team because he wanted another crack at the World Cup. He's, 38, I believe. It's very unlikely that Tim Howard plays for the US again, just because he's done his time, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe Clint Dempsey the same. I'm not sure about that. But there's no point. And here's my other thing.
I think if Bruce Arena were sticking around, which he's not, but if he were, I think Jeff Cameron would be. I bet he would announce his retirement.
You think that bad?
Yep.
Oh, come on. I mean, it's only these 2 games. I'm sure he could come back around.
I feel like if I'm Jeff Cameron, I'm pretty upset.
Yeah,
we know he's a competitive, fiery guy. Mm-hmm. I have to believe that he is sitting there thinking, if I'm playing right now, I didn't score that own goal. Like, and I'm not saying he would say that to Omar Gonzalez. I'm not saying that anything like that. I'm just saying we've seen that before, where a player feels slighted by a coach, and so they say, "I'm done" until that guy is gone. Yeah. And then when that guy is gone, maybe they unretire for a little while.
I've also seen a few lists going around of, like, by the time of the 2022 World Cup, these players will be these ages. And I think like Josie Altidore is 32, for example. And this brings us to the thing I feel quite strongly about this. You should not start building for the 2022 World Cup in 2017. Because you don't know who the player pool is going to be. And it's not worth jettisoning, for example, Josie Altidore, which is a ridiculous idea to get rid of him right now, because he'll be a bit older in 2022. Same for Michael Bradley.
I don't disagree, but I would say this, and this is the thing that it's not even a silver lining, it is just a thing that is the reality. Stop preparing for the 2022 World Cup because we don't know if we're going to be there. Learn this lesson. And I think that is a key thing that like we always do this. As soon as the 2014 World Cup is over, there are infinite articles about here are your potential starters at the 2018 World Cup. Get there first. Stop focusing on this stuff. Yes, give them minutes. Call in Weston McKennie. Maybe give Josh Sargent a cap in a year or two. I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, to have this assumption, and that is what it is, whether or not you want to call it that, it's an assumption of we'll be there, here are the people who could be there, as opposed to how about here are the people who could get us here. Here's a 4-year plan for when Josh Sargent gets his first cap, and hhopefully it goes well. I'm just saying stop with that. Learn the lesson
You
from
mean
this.
Josh Sargent, who's never played an adult professional game in his whole life?
Yeah, but he's going to start in the 2022 World Cup for a team that's definitely going to qualify. I just, like, if nothing else, let's learn the lessons and let's stay focused on the stuff that we need to stay focused upon.
And here's what I'm thinking about is, yes, the 2022 World Cup is what, like, all the media attention will be on and what everybody's thinking about. But there is a Gold Cup in 2019. There's a Copa America in Brazil. It's not officially scheduled yet, but it's basically happening in 2019. If my vote for US president, again, I can't vote for US soccer president, I would be all in on someone who says, part of what we're going to do is, instead of keep thinking in 4-year cycles, we are going to commit to going to every Copa America, because CONMEBOL always invites us. We're going to commit to going to every single one, and we're going to make sure that our guys get exposed to that level of competition on the regular. And one of those things will be going to the 2019 Copa America, right? Then you've got a 2020 possible Copa America Centenario. That's not official yet, but it's a thing that's been talked about.
Yep.
Then there's a 2021 Confederations Cup, which we could be at, because if we win the 2019 Gold Cup, what I'm saying is there are a bunch of tournaments starting in 2019.
Yes. And we should go to all of them.
Yes, we
Every
should.
single tournament starting in 2019.
We should
Don't care what it is.
All the ones we're eligible for, we should. And by that, I mean, I would send an A team to Copa America and a B team to the Gold Cup.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
But this will be a debate that's going to happen. If we win the 2019 Gold Cup, if we win the 2019 Gold Cup, we're guaranteed to be in the Confederations Cup. That's the weird calculation that keeps getting made, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that the experience of a Copa America is arguably superior to the experience of a Confederations Cup, so we should go to the Copa America every time with an A team, every time, no matter what's happening at the Gold Cup.
Again, I want to get back to learn your lessons. Daryl, what is the point of playing in the Confederations Cup?
To prepare for the World Cup.
Right. And so if we had played in this Confederations Cup this past year, how helpful would that have been in preparing us for this World Cup?
It would have been very helpful.
That's my point. And so I want to get to, first of all, I absolutely agree that yes.
Go to the Copa America.
Go to the Copa America.
The invite is there. It's always on the table. Do it.
And if for no other reason than because it's not a friendly in the United States. It is a competitive game in a place where you would not otherwise play a competitive game. Outside of when the confederations merge, yes, when, in 2026, or before that, 2024, I would guess, like, you're not going to have a competitive game in Brazil. You won't, or Argentina, or wherever. Like, but you have those opportunities to go to a Copa America and play in a hostile setting against a very strong team. It builds your chemistry, it builds your character, it lets you know what you're made of, and it gets you ready for games to come. And then my final point, I want to say, of all of this, unless you have more to go into.
I mean, I've got other things to talk about. I'm ready to go.
I want to say, like, if you want to look at this with, like, maybe there's a silver lining.
Yeah.
I will say this, that, like, some elderly folks have a healthy level of cynicism, right? And it's not born of like, oh, I've just got a negative outlook. It's born of they've seen some stuff. They've experienced things. And so many tweets I saw last night or messages I got from people saying like, I can't believe this. The U.S. has qualified for every single World Cup since I've been alive, or since I can remember the United States has played in a World Cup. I can't believe this. My way of looking at that now is like, yeah, and now they haven't, and you know that. So like when 10 years from now, when your kids or whatever are saying like, oh, we're definitely going to go, you've seen them not go, so don't have that expectation. Like, learn from it and know, like, no, things can go wrong. We shouldn't just assume that things are going to be okay. We got to make sure that things are going to be okay by putting systems in place and players in place and managers in place and technical directors in place and presidents in place to make that happen.
Shall we talk about the impact on soccer in America for not going to the World Cup in 2018.
Sure.
As well as how that impacts, for example, Fox, who spent big money on the rights to the 2018.
They're not happy.
2018
Rob Stone and Alexi Lawless said as much when I interviewed them last week.
Of course, yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. And like Total Soccer Show as well. Like it impacts us that the US isn't going to the World Cup. But like, before we get to the media companies, some very large and some kind of small, let's talk about the growth of soccer in America.
Sure.
So my argument would be that had the US gone to the World Cup 2018, there will be some people out there right now who don't think they're soccer fans, because they're not, who would have tuned in for patriotism, might have seen something inspiring, and then become like really like hardcore fans of the US national team, then grow into soccer fans, and the sport grows in the United States. That has been the pattern. We've got that email many times. I love getting that email from people who explain like when they became a soccer fan, and it's often like Landon Donovan's goal. You know what I mean? Or it's some variation of that.
Right.
That is not going to happen.
Nope.
That is bad for us as a podcast. It's bad for soccer in America, but it's not a death blow.
No, it's not.
Because the thing is, this isn't the early days when soccer is trying to like get its claws in and trying to hold on for dear life, right? The good news about this is, not good news, but the reason it's kind of okay is that we are already at the point where soccer is established in whatever form it's in the United States. It's not going to disappear because we miss one World Cup, which could have been the case in the past.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think like you look at how prevalent Premier League, for example, or Bundesliga, if you want to go that route, or Barcelona, Real Madrid, and La Liga to some extent. Like, they're going to be there no matter what. Like, people are going to want to watch those teams. People are going to hear about El Clasico and be excited. People are going to hear about Der Klassiker and be excited. And so, like, you'll still have people tuning in for those. You'll still have people watching the World Cup. You'll probably have some people who wouldn't otherwise watch soccer tune in because it's the World Cup.
Someone will learn to love soccer at the World Cup even without the United States, but they'll be following, like, I don't know, France or something.
This is a weird way to look at this, but I would say I guarantee you that pregnancy rates 9 months after the 2018 World Cup are lower than they were after the 2014 World Cup. I'll say that much in the United States.
In the United States?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Because you think about how many, like, it is a party atmosphere, and that is the thing that I'm saddest about. We volunteered to serve beer in the 2014 World Cup and the USA-Portugal game, and it was overflowing with people who probably wouldn't otherwise hang out. And it's people from all walks of life, from all races, colors, creeds, religious beliefs, political backgrounds, whatever you want to go with. Come together because that's what you do, and you're not going to have those viewing events, and that is very disappointing, and that makes me very sad.
You think that affects the birth rate?
I think so. I think there are probably some people who, like, when Landon Donovan scored that goal against Algeria, were like, maybe they had a few more than they would have otherwise, and they got a little bit more social than they otherwise would have. Just saying.
That's not my major concern, is the birth rate.
No?
No.
That's all I'm ever thinking about. Not really. But so yes, that is very disappointing. But there are still going to be people who are going to be interested in soccer and watching soccer, and so yes, it will stay. But there are certainly going to be some kids who, as much as it bums me out, aren't going to be able to see Christian Pulisic score that game-winning goal in this World Cup and think, I want to be the next Pulisic.
Yep.
They're going to think, I'm going to go play I almost said Nintendo, which really dated myself.
Is that not a thing?
I guess they just re-released Super Nintendo, so yeah, they're going to play Super Nintendo instead.
The other thing that we've mentioned a couple of times is that part of the Total Soccer Show business plan was kind of not dependent, but, you know, it was all built around the US being at the 2018 World Cup.
Yep.
And like, it won't surprise you to learn that our downloads go up massively during a World Cup.
And then extra massively during a US game at a World Cup.
Extra massively during a US game at a World Cup. And then a lot of those listeners sort of find us for the first time and stick with us. So as you can imagine, like, the growth of the Total Soccer Show, which I'm sure if you've been with us for a few years, because this podcast is about 8 years old, by the way, was kind of, we were expecting a big bump from the 2018 World Cup. Now we're going to get a slightly smaller bump, right? Still a bump because it's still a World Cup, but not the gigantic growth that we expected.
Yep.
I'd mentioned that a couple of times offhand, and honestly I mentioned it not really thinking that the US would fail to qualify, which is part of the arrogance we were talking about earlier, correct? We got so many emails and tweets and DMs, and I want to thank each and every person who reached out to us to kind of encourage us to keep going. Loads of people subscribe to support us at totalsoccershow.com/join. And I think part of that, people were a little worried that we were going to fold because the US didn't go to the World Cup.
I'll put it this way. We got so many of those tweets and messages saying, like, I hope you guys are still going to continue to broadcast, that, like, when we parted ways last night, we had each had 2 beers. And I was like, did Daryl have, like, 4 more beers? And then tweet, like, it's all over. Like, what is happening? Because, yes, we are going to continue to do exactly what we're doing. We just maybe won't have as much U.S. content in, say, June and July of 2018.
That will be the low point for U.S. content.
A little bit.
They'll be involved in some World Games. But yeah, we will still. So our plan all along.
Oh, that's
we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We will still do what we committed to, which is kind of what we did.
We're the sparring partners now. Oh no!
What we did with Euro 2016 is we previewed and reviewed every single game. We profiled every team and did huge previews. We are still going to do that for the World Cup, right? We will give it the full attention of, like, we'll watch every single game and give you a review of it because it's still the World Cup. It still only happens once every 4 years. We still love soccer and we're all in on it, even if it's heartbreaking that the US isn't there. So Total Soccer Show isn't going anywhere. The business plan isn't, like, it's not going to explode as we hoped it would, but it'll still, like, what's somewhere between not exploding and fully exploding. It'll sizzle. It'll still sizzle for the World Cup in 2018.
Sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can come up with anything off the top of my head. I'll say maybe we'll.
I'm not sure I did either.
Maybe we'll add a wrinkle into the preview of, like, here's a reason why American fans should root for them, and then, like, everybody can pick their neutral team.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, I'm going England, by the way.
That's fair. So am I.
Right. So yeah, we'll do some England.
Taylor Browning Rockwell, son of Frederick III. Yeah, we'll go.
So we'll do some
England.
We'll do a little more England attention than maybe we would have because we would have been fully focused on the United States. But so thank you to everybody who subscribed. Thank you to everybody who's, like, extra supported us. But also, please don't worry that we're going to disappear. We are going to be doing exactly the same number of shows as we would have done. And from what we've discussed, probably 40 minutes ago at this point, we're also...
Seems like 10 years.
There's a lot of US stuff to talk about that we're going to be getting into over the next few weeks. So there's plenty to talk about, is what I'm saying.
There is indeed. And we can get to that on a later date. Maybe, say, tomorrow evening?
Yeah, tomorrow evening. Oh, there's other World Cup stuff to talk about as well. There's a whole other World Cup qualification cycle happening.
I suppose.
Yeah.
We're not talking about CONCACAF.
Do you want to come back tomorrow to do our World Cup roundup?
That works for me.
All the other things.
No, let's do it right now.
Including Messi.
Let's stack it on.
So if you've stuck through to the end of the show, thank you very much. I hope you found it helpful. We've tried to really just cover as much ground as possible because I've just been having thoughts all day and things I wanted to say to you all day. So I've really enjoyed coming to the office and sort of having this back and forth with you. I feel like I've exercised some things, and I hope listeners have had the same experience.
Exorcised some things, like exorcism? All right, cool. I'm down for that.
With an E and an O.
That works for me.
Yeah. Okay. Taylor Rockwell, thank you for taking the time to listen to me today.
I will say what I always say in just a moment, but first I will say, for anyone else out there who's still feeling a little bit sad, as the collective poet Chumbawamba once said, I get knocked down, I get back up again. You're never going to keep me down. Right back at you, buddy.